Before I begin this story, I need to warn you about something. What you're about to hear completely changed my perspective on internet deals. If you're thinking about booking an accommodation that seems too good to be true, perhaps you should first hear what happened to Laura and Martin. Their real names have been changed to protect their families, but the events I'm about to narrate are as real as they are disturbing. It all began on a cold October afternoon. Laura was browsing on her phone, searching for that perfect getaway to escape the suffocating city atmosphere. Her fingers suddenly stopped when she found something that seemed too good: a rustic cabin in the middle of the woods, at a ridiculously low price. The photographs showed a cozy place, surrounded by ancient pines, and with that peaceful atmosphere they so desperately craved. The description promised an authentic nature experience, and the price. The price was just a fraction of what similar accommodations cost. "It's too good to be true," Martin muttered when Laura showed him the listing. But her enthusiasm was contagious, and besides, what could go wrong? The few reviews they found were terse, almost robotic. "Quiet place, unique experience, will return soon." The host, a certain Mrs. Elena, responded with equally brief and cold messages, but efficient ones. She assured them total privacy and a memorable stay. They couldn't imagine just how memorable it would be. On the day of their arrival, the GPS began to fail as they entered the forest. The road became increasingly narrow, and the trees, older and more twisted, seemed to lean over their car like curious elderly observers. The sun could barely penetrate through the dense foliage, creating shadows that danced in disturbing ways. Laura felt a shiver run down her spine when they finally spotted the cabin. Reality was very different from the photographs. The structure loomed like a sick creature, with broken windows covered by plastics that fluttered like trembling eyelids. The wood was blackened by moisture, and a sweet smell, like rotting leaves and something else they couldn't identify, floated in the air. The front door emitted an agonizing creak when they opened it, as if warning about the horrors that awaited inside. "We should leave," Martin suggested, but Laura insisted on staying. The money was already paid, and besides, where else would they go at this hour? The cabin's interior was a mosaic of shadows and dusty antiques. Yellowed photographs decorated the walls, showing unknown faces that seemed to follow them with their gaze. The air was heavy, thick, as if the house itself was breathing. The first night was when the anomalies began, a rhythmic tapping on the roof, as if someone was walking with a specific pattern. Laura woke up startled to hear footsteps on the upper floor, but Martin reminded her that the cabin didn't have a second floor. The sounds continued, accompanied by whispers that seemed to call her name from the darkest corners. Objects began to change places. A cup they swore they'd left in the kitchen appeared in the bathroom. The car keys moved by themselves from one drawer to another. On the second morning, while exploring the house, Martin found a photograph that froze his blood. It showed a group of people in the cabin's living room, but something was terribly wrong. Their expressions were of pure terror, their bodies in unnatural positions, as if they had been captured at the exact moment of their maximum horror. Looking closer, he noticed something disturbing. In the background of the image, a dark and deformed figure watched them, with eyes that glowed like embers. In the basement, they discovered a door locked with a rusty padlock. Curiosity overcame fear, and after forcing it open, they found an ancient diary. The yellowed pages revealed a terrifying truth. The cabin wasn't just accommodation, it was an altar. The previous owners had performed dark rituals to feed an entity that lived in the forest, a creature as ancient as the trees themselves. The diary detailed how they lured unsuspecting travelers with irresistible prices, turning them into involuntary sacrifices. Among the pages, they found a macabre list, names and dates, dozens of them. Some were crossed out with a reddish ink that looked like dried blood. The last name on the list was Laura, written in a different, fresher handwriting, with the exact date of their arrival. The atmosphere in the house became unbearable. The walls seemed to pulse like a sick heart, and the whispers turned into distorted voices repeating fragments from the diary. One night, Laura woke up and found Martin standing in front of the window, completely motionless. When she called him, he didn't respond. His reflection in the glass showed empty eyes and a smile that wasn't his. Behind him, a monstrous figure materialized. A twisted mass of branches, flesh, and bright eyes that pulsated like dying stars. They tried to flee, but the forest had transformed. The trees moved, closing every possible escape route. A cruel laugh, composed of dozens of overlapping voices, resonated among the trunks. When they returned to the cabin, they discovered new photographs on the walls. They were of them, sleeping, eating, arguing. Private moments that no one could have captured. The horror reached its peak when the walls began to bleed. The photographs came to life, showing scenes of their own death over and over again. The diary, fallen on the floor, opened to a page that read, "The house is the offering, and you are its heart. The ritual must continue." In their desperation, they discovered a hidden door in the basement. They ran into the forest while the entity pursued them, accompanied by the spectral shadows of previous victims. The trees seemed to reach for them with branches that turned into skeletal arms. When dawn finally came, Martin realized he was alone. Laura had disappeared, and the forest, like a living maze, guided him back to the cabin. Now, months later, the cabin still appears on rental applications. The price is even more tempting, and the comments remain just as brief. But if you look carefully at the photos, you might see Laura in one of them, smiling emptily at the camera, with eyes that are no longer entirely human. If you ever find an offer that seems too good to be true, remember this story, because sometimes the real price isn't paid with money, but with something much more valuable, the soul itself. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and leave your comments about what you think really happened to Laura. Is she still trapped in the cabin? Did she become part of the forest entity? Subscribe so you don't miss more sinister stories like this one, and remember, some offers are impossible to refuse.